How did I get started as a tour guide? One of the main reasons I moved up to Portland is so that I could have a dog. And with that new dog, I went walking around different neighborhoods. I even went down to a blueprint shop and got a map of the entire city of Portland. And then I began to mark with a highlighter each different route I took with the dog. And I did a different route every day with the objective of someday being able to look at that whole map and see it filled with yellow. Anyway, I told friends about this and they said, hey, we'd like to come with you. So I let them, and we discovered different neighborhoods together. And then, of course, somebody whispered into my ear, hey, you should charge for this. So I did. I began to charge about $5 a tour, and I started a company called Tom's Uniquely Portland, where I led weekly walks throughout Portland. I was doing all this while still working full-time in a company downtown Portland. I even snuck in a lot of the walks during my lunch hour, which became longer and longer. It wasn't a problem, because as long as I carried a clipboard with me when I left the building, everybody thought I was working. So it continued on, but I found that I was working less and walking more. So eventually I went to my boss and said, I'm only working about 4 hours a week here, even though I'm here for 40 hours. Maybe it would be best if you hired me back as a contractor, and then I just worked when you needed me, and then I could go focus on my other business and put my energy there when I wasn't doing things for you. She said, Tom, there's a problem with that. We're a very conservative company, and we couldn't be sure that you were working when you're not here. And I said, I just told you I'm not working and I'm sitting right in front of you. So we didn't resolve anything that day, but I did resolve that I was going to start my company and quit my job. So I spent a year saving up about $30,000, which I figured is about all I needed to live a year without any salary. And then I quit my job. I began leading my walking tours, sometimes as many as 5 walks a week. But the problem with Portland is it rains quite a bit. And so a good number of those tours had very few people show up. By December, I called my dad. Now he and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but he did share this with me, and it was one of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me. He said, Tom, I've always noticed you make the most money when you work for someone else. I heeded that advice, and I went ahead and applied for a job at a company called Hub Tours in Portland. Secured that job, started as a driver guide, and did that for a couple years before they offered me the opportunity to do step-on guiding. That was a little different. One of the owners of the company expressed that I needed to get some experience before I could lead a step-on tour. And she was right. There are a lot of components to a step-on tour. Fortunately, the first one I led was with someone else, so I had access to their experience and knowledge. Anyway, after being on the road for a week, enjoying beautiful hotels that were nicer than my apartment, and meals that were nicer than ones I cooked for myself, I decided this is the career for me. And that's how I got my career started as a tour director. Of course, at some point I had to go back to my dad and apologize for the huge investment he'd made in sending me to college. I got my degree as an architect, never practiced a day in my life. Although I did get a job as a graphic designer and then a web designer, which were somewhat related. But when I got my job as a tour guide, well, I struggled to make that connection. I said, Dad, just like in architecture and graphic design and web design, I'm helping make life easier for people. He responded to me, you know, son, you've never been in jail, you've never been on drugs, and you've never asked me for money. We're good. In fact, you're the happiest kid I have.